What's going on, everyone? Welcome to Movie Emporium's TV review of the Apple TV Plus original series, Smoke. This will follow episode 9, which is called Mirror Mirror, and is directed by Chappelle. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've finally come to the conclusion of the at least first season, I'm hoping, of Smoke, especially on the way it ends. If this is the end of the series, then I am kind of disappointed by it, but if it is not, then you know what, that's fine. I can definitely appreciate that, for especially where it ends. But this is a lot of you have to suspend disbelief quite a bit in this episode, just on the simple fact of what it's trying to do. And for the most part, I think Taron Egerton, who is a pretty decent actor who has done pretty good in this series, is a little over the top in this episode as his kind of veneer and his facade starts to unhinge and starts to kind of fully fall apart. This is an episode where you kind of have to believe the simple fact that Jurnee Smollett's character is going to get away with it, even though Rafe Spall's Steven character comes back and is basically her Geppetto in a lot of ways, basically saying, you know, they're gonna find out and you're going to get suspected. And so we'll see how that plays out if there's a second season, which I'm assuming is what a lot of this stuff is being aimed for. But I mean, overall, it's an entertaining episode. It's not the strongest of the season. It is definitely like a lot of TV series that have a season finale. Never usually the strongest, but usually has some interesting concepts and ideas it could play with, and gets a chance for a lot of these characters to have at least some kind of emotional conclusion to their arc. And it basically is the end of the first season in a lot of respects. So with that said, basically this is an episode where they're investigating the Rafe Spall's death character. We see some graphic images of the burned body and stuff like that. We have a new police captain that comes into the mix who is investigating the scene, and in the process of everything, after everything is kind of starting to fully envelop itself and Dave's starting to become the suspect of it, even Dave says they're going to frame me for this, even though his ex-wife's like, I didn't see you here. It's actually kind of a domineering play that's kind of interesting, but in the process of all of it, it is just kind of a chaotic mess. I mean, we have all these characters are kind of wondering why would he be killed, and you know, Dave has no alibi anymore, and it's going to go to one kind of conclusion, but you have to have an hour wrap up. So what are we going to have? We're going to have, you know, the firefighters and all the you know, the burn units and stuff like that. They're going to try and put out the fires. It sets off a fire in a mill, which I thought was going to be a bigger play, but it's just for atmosphere. It's for a chance for Dave and, of course, Michelle to have kind of their kind of like villain versus hero moment, even though I think Michelle's kind of a villain in her own right. And in the process, Michelle and Dave go on this odyssey journey through the forest or whatever, and they land themselves at this mill. And for some reason, Dave is like, you know, having some kind of mental explosion of awesomeness in his mind, and he's, you know, ramping up the car. He crashes the car with Michelle with no seatbelt on. Somehow she survives, even though I'm wondering if she did survive. She survived the crashing through a window. She unloads a bunch of clips on Dave on his car, and then she sticks a gun in his mouth. Almost like she's seduced by it. And when it comes to this episode called Mirror Mirror, there's like reflections all over this episode. Like you can almost see Michelle in Dave's persona in a lot of respects. She gets off on like torturing people or something like that. I don't know if that's the conclusion about why, you know, what her mother did to her and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of similarities between Dave and Michelle when it comes to the traumatic events of their history, the torture they go through, and the kind of story arc of this series, and kind of the nature of how each one of them looks at each other. As you know, Michelle looks at herself kind of weak, and Dave looks at himself kind of powerful. And it flips at the end of the episode where Dave is actually very much putting on persona of what he thinks he looks like and what he actually does look like. And Michelle gets that strength in her, which she didn't have because she was dealing with the mother situation, and how that plays out. And it's very much a reversal of fortune in a lot of respects. So now Michelle is in a place of power and Dave is a weakling. So it actually, you know, coincides with like the kind of the twisting and turning and the kind of the scaling motion of, like, you know, the way systems work and stuff like that. What's really interesting is how Dave truly thought he saw himself. You know, we saw when he got in that accident, we saw the mirror and we saw his reflection, and I was kind of wondering what that meant. But here we see that Dave actually sees himself as a much sexier version of himself, a much more powerful version of himself, and really he's just an overweight, baldy, middle-aged man who loses his wife, who just kind of throws all his crap into a box, and his ex-wife, I don't know what she saw in him. It's a really weird. I'm kind of interested to see how that plays out if there's a second season. But the fact that we get the image that we saw in that earlier episode of what Dave truly looks like, it's a really interesting kind of fall from grace and fall from his character, because when he looks at himself walking into the store, we see him, he's like, I'm the hero, I'm this and that, but he's looking at himself in this different light, in this kind of personal kind of twisting of his image, where he sees himself limping, and that's kind of who he truly is and what he really is. And it really is an interesting thing to see, because the idea of who we think we are and who we really are can be two different things, especially if you've gone through some really traumatic events. That fire that we saw at the beginning of the series, that could be something that truly messed him up in a lot of respects when he was truly younger, and it caused a lot of emotional trauma. Maybe it's the same fire that Michelle's character was in. I mean, I don't entirely know. That it wouldn't make any sense. So it depends on how old Dave is at this point, because Dave could be a lot older than Michelle. But it really shows the chaotic events of somebody who's truly unhinged in a lot of respects, and has really gone through some damaging scenarios and stuff like that. It's kind of the revelation that Dawn and Ezra find the materials, the jacket, the glasses, the hat, for the simple fact that it was hidden in his glove compartment, which in the crash found itself underneath the car. Maybe Dave hid it under the car and stuff like that. That is the complete undoing of course, Dave's character, which is really interesting. But I think the visual work, the cinematography, the stuff in the burned out forest is really cool. I think there's a really cool shot where it goes from Stephen Burke's house to the firefighters that are trying to contain the fire, to the fire kind of starting, and then we see kind of sparks of flames and stuff like that, sparks of fire hitting the mill. And I thought it was a really cool shot. I think it's a really cool kind of use of it's probably CGI and stuff like that, but it's a really cool, because you float into with the fire sparks into the mill. And once again, I thought that was going to be a bigger, more used kind of situation for the series, but it's more just to kind of have that set piece with Dave and Michelle. But the other thing I truly like about, especially with Michelle's character and the Stephen Burke character and stuff like that, is the simple fact that she noticed she's not a perfect individual, as we see, because she forgets about the camera of the neighbor's house, and she has to use her brother or whatever, who's a con man and scumbag, to basically enter this person's house to find the footage. Which I love how he finds the remote under the couch, because that's a lot of times what we do. We forget we can't find our stuff, and it's usually in the weirdest of places. But he goes into the house. He actually calls the woman and says, don't come back, because we're still dealing with the investigation. He goes in there. He puts a thumb drive in, removes all the footage, which is going to be real suspect if they do a season 2. It's the footage just doesn't disappear. There could be cameras in the house. There's a lot of mistakes that these characters can make. But because you have to suspend disbelief a little bit, you're assuming that her brother, who realizes what Michelle has done, has removed the footage or whatever. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. But I am a little disappointed, because the story starts with that, and it's really intrigued by that, and it's really thought about by that, but then it just kind of focuses all on Dave and Michelle, which is how it should have focused to begin with. But it's one of those things where it leaves kind of a thread unchecked, which means if they do a second season, if it's approved for a second season, that means there's gonna be a lot there. There's gonna be a lot of now that the Dave character has been caught, are you gonna have the trial stuff? Are you gonna have Michelle kind of having to go on the lam? I mean, there's gonna be a lot of stuff. It's like the Dexter scenario, where Dexter at some point is caught by, not caught, but his police detective and dokes and stuff like that kind of figure out who he is or pay the price. So we'll see how that plays out. But I love how Harvey just kind of tells off Dave, and Dave is just like, you know, we were friends and you betrayed everything, and you are clearly the arsonist, and everything that plays out with that. You know, it gives Greg Kinnear a good send off for at least this season of like everything he's been betrayed by, and the simple fact that, like, you know, Harvey is under his own issues with his, you know, scheming of money and his, you know, stuff like that, and how everybody in this show is like completely not always on the level and stuff like that. So I really appreciate that kind of stuff, and I think it's a really interesting tell with, you know, where Harvey's character is going to go if he ends up in the second season, if there is a second season. As Dave starts faltering, as Michelle starts getting the upper hand, as Dave, like, you know, his foot, how he kind of like, you know, gets real tense and like starts freaking out a little bit. You see his foot kind of move back and forth or up and down. You know, when he gets nervous, you can start seeing that fall down, and you see the captain and the police sergeant or whatever watch him through the mirror. I love how Dave is just like, he's twisting and turning on Michelle. He's trying to get her to get angry at him, to force a, you know, almost like, you know, he was right type of scenario, but she gets the upper hand. And as he reveals himself to basically be a different person than what we see, I love the stare down that they have, even though it goes on for a little too long because they need to spread it to make it an hour long. The look of Dave, who finally his unhinged personality comes out, his smile, and watching Michelle kind of look into his eyes, it really is a mirror image where she is the strong, like I said earlier, the stronger person, he's the weaker person. So he sees a lot of himself in her, and it makes him smile, is what I'm gathering from that scene. So whether that is what it is, I don't entirely know, but it's really good. It really has a good palpable energy to it. And yeah, that's kind of where the episode ends. And once again, is a lot of stuff that is lingering. There's a lot of threads open to where if Dennis Lehane and his directors and writing staff and, you know, crew end up getting a second season, there's a lot of opening threads that they can work with, which is really good kind of logical writing. But you have to go in knowing that there could be no second season, so you have to kind of conclude it. So the opening thread with like the Stephen Burke stuff, and like where does it go with Dave and Michelle, and where does it go with Michelle's situation with the fire and stuff like that, it just, if it ends here, it ends here, but I would like to know more. And that's yeah, that's Smoke season 1 finale, which is Mirror Mirror. So, but with my final score for this episode, I'll give it a 9 out of 10. I thought it was a pretty competent. It's not perfect, like I said, it has some leaps of logic, but a 9 out of 10 seems pretty good. But I was still really entertained, and I had a lot of fun watching the episode. But for my final thoughts of the actual series, that yes, it's pulpy, yes, it's a little goofy and cheesy, and you have to kind of strain your beliefs when it comes to like television writing and stuff like that. I still think Dennis Lehane and his crew put on a pretty competent, well acted, kind of funly paced series that had 2 great leads and a bunch of great supporting cast. And I think in the end, for the series, I'll give it a 9 out of 10. I think it was a really well done series that I had a lot of fun with. So overall, really good, really kind of competent stuff with a lot of like goofy, like over the top scenarios, but I liked it for what it was worth. So there you go. Anyways, thank you so much for watching and joining me for this series review and recap. I do appreciate it. Comments below. What do you think of the series overall? What do you think of where it went? What do you think about the revelations? All that good stuff. Let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much. If you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell. Top to fun's coming next. If you like these videos, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out, guys.